Hello, everybody, and welcome to Flora's State of Play webinar. Today, we're going to be discussing the regulatory landscape of three countries critical to the global cannabis industry. Before we begin, I do have to remind participants that some of our comments today may be considered forward-looking statements and are subject to numerous risks. Because of that, that might cause the company's actual results to differ materially from what has been communicated. Forward-looking statements made today are effective only as of today. So now that that is all out of the way, I would like to introduce our panel today. Of course, we have our chairman and CEO, Luis Merchan. Hello, welcome, Luis.
Hi, Jesse. Good to be here.
Thank you for being here. We have our Chief Commercial Officer, Jason Warnock. Good to see you, Jason, calling in from Canada.
From the Great Way North.
Good to see you. And of course, our Vice President of Regulatory Affairs, Holly Bell. Welcome, Holly.
Thanks, Jesse. I'm glad to be here.
And just a quick reminder to everybody who's on, we do have that Q&A chat open. So please, as they come up, drop your questions in there. We'll be doing a bit of a Q&A at the end, and we'll do our best to answer some of those questions as we go along as well. We may run out of time, but we'll do our best to answer as many of those questions as we can. So let's start here. So recently, New Frontier Data estimated that the CAGR of the cannabis industry, both medical and recreational, was going to be somewhere close to 20%. So it's clear that there are expectations that at every level, medically, recreationally, even black market, that the cannabis industry is expected to grow by leaps and bounds in the coming years. And it's through that lens that I'd like to begin with a question. If we can, Luis, I'd like to start with you. So as you look beyond some of the political back and forth regarding full legalization and in any country around the world, I'd like for viewers to understand Flora's perspective and general outlook on the global cannabis market. Is the future medical, is it recreational, is it commodity based? I'd love to get some of your insights here just to set the table.
Yeah, thank you, Jesse, for that question. Look, we at Flora believe that the global cannabis trade will include all of the above. The difference between the medical pharmaceutical market compared to the recreational or adult use will be the cultivation and extraction practices with regards to cannabis. One of them has very strict protocols for the cultivation, extraction, and traceability of the flower and the derivatives and the API, and the other one has less stringent regulatory oversight. There's certainly a tremendous amount of upside on both of them, and Flora is set and positioned to take advantage of both. We firmly believe that the global trade will, in many ways, as it's split today, it's almost like a 40-60%. In between cannabis, between recreational, adult use, and medicinal. We firmly believe that will continue. That proportion will continue to remain over the next several years, and that means that a company that wants to be involved in the global cannabis trade needs to be able to play on both fronts.
That's all really positive, and certainly, if anybody who's familiar with the Flora story will know that our focus does span across all of those things. So I appreciate that bit of table setting. I'd like to turn now and focus a little bit in on Colombia. I think that's likely the least familiar market for most of our audience today, but one that is making incredible leaps and bounds and progress. They really look to be setting the tone for the future of cannabis. And just so our listeners and attendees are aware, Colombia recently elected a pro-cannabis president who's seeking to move beyond the initial cannabis framework laid out by the past administration, and they'll be taking charge, I believe, on the 7th, if that's correct, Luis. And they also look like they're beginning to position themselves as sort of the future of Latin American cannabis. Just a few weeks ago, Colombian Senator Gustavo Bolivar put forth a bill seeking the legalization of recreational cannabis in the country. So, Luis, can you help us understand how this bill differs from existing current laws and regulation, and what the potential implications are from both a Colombian domestic perspective and even from the more broader global landscape when we look at this bill coming to life here?
Yeah, it's meaningful, Jesse, and you're absolutely right. Look, the Colombian government has always been pro-cannabis, and it's been for close to a decade. And the groundwork was laid about 6 years ago when Senator Galan, who's a former advisor to our company, put forth a bill that laid down the framework for not only medicinal cannabis, but also for the potential of industrial uses and eventually adult use. Up to date, what has happened in Colombia has been that we are able, Colombian companies or operators, international operators that have operations in Colombia, are able to cultivate flower, are able to export dry flower, cultivate derivatives and export derivatives, and now are able, with the recent changes in the law, are also able to manufacture food and beverage products for export. That's the extent to where we are as of today. Now, that has been very meaningful, and just this year, for the first time, operators are able to export flower out of Colombia. And I think probably several of members of the audience have seen that companies have started to trickle out exports of dry flower out of Colombia into other countries. That trade is just starting, and it's very meaningful because it's almost 50% of the cannabis pie, the flower trade across the entire globe. Now, what is very positive about Senator Bolivar, as you mentioned, and our new president-elect, Gustavo Petro, is that they also want to legalize adult use or recreational cannabis. And adult use is a far larger portion of the cannabis market than medicinal is. And it also carries lower levels of regulatory scrutiny than that of pharmaceutical components. So effectively, if this bill is passed, which we fully expect it will be, because not only Gustavo Bolivar wrote a law that makes a ton of sense for the Colombian government and for the Colombian economy, also his party owns the majority of Congress. And all that political goodwill that exists today with the new president will be invested in cannabis. I think there's a tremendous amount of news flow coming out of Colombia. I have personally spoken and interviewed Senator Bolivar about their efforts. And that means that companies like Flora Growth will not only be able to export cannabis for medicinal purposes, we will also be able to export cannabis for recreational and adult use. Furthermore, when you look at the market inside of Colombia, Colombia has a large population, 55 million Colombians, of which about 75% of the population are a total addressable market and potential cannabis users. There's 6 million patients out there that are utilizing opioids that can now move into cannabis, which is far less harmful. And also the recreational market and adult use market will be significant once we're able to clear these regulatory changes.
Quickly, you touched on the medical opportunity in Colombia specifically, which already exists, but can you give us a little bit of insight in how Colombia is addressing the medical market today?
Yeah, look, it's been incredibly positive. Earlier this year, I believe in January or February of this year, it was announced that the Colombian government would subsidize prescription-based cannabinoid products, which means that now there's almost universal healthcare in Colombia. About over 95% of Colombians are covered by healthcare, and the cannabis formulations are covered under the healthcare system, which means that a patient can go to the doctor, get a prescription, and then be reimbursed for that prescription by the government, which is incredibly positive. Now, the road ahead of us is not only in like something that Flora is doing, is manufacturing cannabinoid-based formulas for distribution to patients, but also our life sciences arm is focused on educating the doctor and patient community to ensure that they start prescribing these types of medications. But it's going to take some time to get the education and ramp up revenue and adoption on this front.
Sure, that makes a lot of sense. Quickly, just because we got a question in the chat and it's topical, we're talking about Colombia right now. Can I have Jason or Luis, can you guys highlight the advantages of growing in Colombia? Obviously, we understand the regulatory landscape that's making it as advantageous as it is, but just a quick little primer for the people who maybe aren't as familiar with the sort of the bio-advantageous nature of where Colombia sits from a growing perspective.
You start, I'll compliment Jason.
Okay, thanks. I was going to say we've talked about it many times. I think it's really important to understand that the cannabis plant by itself is very requires really the equatorial nature of the conditions. Even if you're in a greenhouse or you're in a bunker somewhere in the world, really to get the maximum benefit, you need to ultimately get to about 12 hours of light and darkness. Obviously, equatorial grow spots around the world have an inherent advantage just on their global position, just to start. Then when you add in, obviously, the conditions of the soil, Colombia is a massive cut flower industry. People don't recognize that there's a massive community of skilled labor, cost advantages, clean water, clean air, clean conditions to really maximize just the natural growing conditions of the plant itself. When you combine it with, as Luis mentioned, a government that's very interested in creating economic opportunities that creates infrastructure and business and industry. So I think Colombia because of its natural geographic advantages, as well as the conditions, the soil, the air, the conditions that make it, cannabis is really ideally suited to that climate.
Yeah, and then just to complement that, when we founded this company and decided to set our base of operations in terms of cultivation and extraction in Colombia, we consider all of those factors that Jason mentioned. We are located 3,000 feet above sea level, which is optimal for the grow of cultivation of this specialty cut flower. As Jason mentioned, Colombia is the #1 producer of cut flowers in the world. Is the #2 exporter of flowers in the world. 70% of the flowers that are exported into the United States come from Colombia. So it's likely that the majority of the members of the audience that are here today have at one point or another held in their hands Colombian flowers. And the cannabis plant is a specialty cut flower. There is an ancestral and hundreds of years of knowledge in terms of cultivation, and the labor cost is just significantly cost effective. It's 9 times more cost effective skilled agricultural labor in Colombia than that of North America. And all of that translates into high quality and exceptionally low cost structure. Our cost structure is at 6 cents per gram flower as of today. It's been now for quite some time. We expect that to continue to improve over time. And when you compare that to North American counterparts, we are 25 times more cost effective. And for that reason, we selected Colombia, separate from, of course, all the geopolitical reasons that I have mentioned already.
And correct me if I'm wrong here, but because of the positioning, the geographical positioning, Colombia isn't necessarily beholden to the same planting and harvesting cycles as you would get in other places that maybe have, cold seasons, traditional winters and falls and things like that. Is that accurate? Are we harvesting on a more regular basis?
But yeah, we would operate as a full year, so perpetual harvest, essentially always rotating the crops through the entirety of our licensed facilities and lands. And I think that's a very distinct advantage. You can still do perpetual harvest in other places, but you're either creating artificial darkness, artificial light, artificial other conditions. So, any outdoor grow in the world can do certain different things, but they won't have 365 growing conditions.
Understood. That's great. Thank you. So Luis, one thing that you just touched on was sort of this intergenerational knowledge and know-how around agriculture and how to grow in Colombia. And one thing that was announced this week was a joint venture with the largest indigenous tribe in Colombia. Can you help the audience understand what this partnership means for the Misak people that we were partnered with, as well as for Flora?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, it's very clear to us. It was very clear from the beginning that small and medium cultivators around Colombia would be left behind if larger companies would not support them in a meaningful way. There is an ancestral knowledge that is out there in terms of cultivation that has happened for hundreds of years, the cultivation of the cannabis plant and many, many other plants. So for that reason, it's important that companies like Flora, not only should do this because it's the right thing, but we have to do it by law. It's important that we work with small cultivators to support them in their efforts of cultivating and also exporting. The Misak community is the largest indigenous tribe in Colombia. They're located in the department of Cauca, which has been one of the departments that has been the most affected by the war on drugs. They have been disproportionately affected by the violence attached to the war on drugs. and it felt just like the right partnership for us. The leader of the company and part of one of the leaders of their tribe is called Mama Liliana Misak. She's a beautiful individual who has a tremendous heart and has a very entrepreneurial spirit. They're developing great products. They have honey that is infused with CBD and have the bees right there on site where they're cultivating the cannabis. They also have a tremendous amount of products, CBD infused coffee and several artisanal products that they want to put to market and bring to market. And they need a company like ours to support them in those efforts. They also need a company like ours to support them in their supply chain efforts. So this is a great opportunity to partner with an indigenous community that has been disproportionately affected, but also in Colombia, and this is a priority for the incoming government, indigenous tribes and minorities on the rural areas of the country are going to take priority in Petro's government. And having this strategic partnership will allow us to also have easier access to regulatory challenges that we have been facing. So it's a very symbiotic relationship and a very creative transaction. This JV will allow us to put products to market at a far faster rate, will support the communities in Colombia, and of course, help in terms of goodwill with the Colombian government and the Colombian population.
That's great. Thank you. So, we covered a lot of what's been going on in Colombia, but things have been moving really quickly there. But I think the overall sentiment is that we have a very pro-cannabis administration coming in. There's a lot of movement. And obviously, if there's any other questions from the audience about what's going on in Colombia, please feel free to drop it into the question and answer section. We'll make sure that we get to those as best we can. So now I'd like to switch over to Canada. So we have sort of the new and emerging market in Colombia. Now we're going to move over to Canada, a bit of the legacy market in our new industry. But I think a lot of the world looks to Canada to understand how not to roll out recreational and sort of federally legal cannabis. And so Jason is our resident expert in Canada. We want to get your take a little bit. So since the beginning, Canada has chosen to regulate CBD in the same way as they've looked at psychoactive THC. And obviously now we have the changes happening where CBD is looking like it's going to be approved for over-the-counter sales, and there's some movement happening here. Obviously, it's going to provide more access to CBD for consumers around the country. But what is your take on what that means for the cannabis market more broadly, and maybe a bit on how CBD is perceived, given how it had been previously categorized?
And thanks, Jesse. It's I think you made a very good point. Canada is the guinea pig for a lot of these rules. And as you said, some of them I think were met with much fanfare and received a lot of notoriety, and some of them maybe not so much. And we can see how the rest of the world really has advanced far beyond Canada when it comes to the issue of CBD. I think Canada, as you mentioned, still regulates it very much as if you were going to go buy any other product from a cannabis store. So it is entirely controlled by a licensed producer who sells to the province. The province then categorizes and makes it for sale at a dispensary. The dispensary then chooses whether or not to carry those products within their structure. So as you can imagine, if you're going to a particular store, you're likely to see 99% THC products. So there's a very limited amount of true CBD products available. Now you could go the medical route and get a prescription and go and then order things directly. But this has created this really, this lagging of all the CBD markets for Canada. And people have been wanting and pushing for the efficacy of this product for years, obviously. So they made these big advances, but then sort of shut the door on the opportunities that exist in this more kind of everyday, day-to-day market where people are looking for other products maybe to regulate pain or anxiety or what have you. So they've created this really large infrastructural barrier. So as you mentioned, Health Canada, which is the regulatory agency for all these things, commissioned a study of outside experts in Canada to really study the efficacy and the opportunity of what CBD would be as a over-the-counter product in Canada. The big results that have come out in the last week have been really the most important thing, I think, is that they've published that it's non-habit forming and that it has true efficacy of relieving symptoms of pain, stress, nervousness, and promoting sleep. So they've come out sort of on the record now saying these are all conditions that we accept unanimously, and this product should be now moved to a more traditional manner of access to the general population. Of course, in the US and many states and the UK and different parts of the world, this has already happened, whether it's the UK with novel food or in the US, each state by state will regulate this usage. But Canada as a whole has kept this essentially under wraps. So with this, and I should be clear, it's not with the passage of a new law, with the intent that Health Canada has commissioned the study. They've received a number of recommendations that I think are really not just for Canada, but for the world. This is showing a real progress towards the efficacy and the proof of these products being part of our everyday lives. So as Canada now moves and evolves, we should hope to see some of this kind of trickle out into all markets around the world, where this is a day-to-day product that should have no more stigma than anything else.
And so one thing that I've sort of seen popping up, as we're looking at, I think once there is a mature market or a more mature market, the regulations don't, changes in regulations don't come, as quickly. Things change a little bit more slowly. And so, for at least the last little while, we've sort of seen a bit of a stagnation in the Canadian market, at least from new players entering. So, with the opening up of, or potentially opening up of access to CBD, and just, the general uptake of THC usage, do you see that there is a viable or desirable path for a new big player to enter the Canadian cannabis market right now?
Oh, absolutely. I think this is really a change that is more seismic than people recognize, because they're showing now that there's no habit forming conditions around an over-the-counter product that can be used collectively by anyone, of age, and including large dosage, 20 to 200 milligrams a day is actually a significant dose to come out on the record saying, we unanimously think this is safe and when this should be accessible to everyone. It's a major change. When the infrastructure of the Canadian economy was developed to cannabis, it's derived towards medical first, and then it was recreational. And most of the players are producing, as I think Louisa mentioned before, almost primarily flower and on large quantities, and all derived on primarily high THC strains. Moving this way has created opportunities for many players to enter the market. In addition, this also opens up the opportunity that branded, differentiated products that have long-term efficacy around the world have a new entry point into the government or to the system, because now we're not holding it within a small confines of LPs. We're actually opening the opportunity for more players. This also opens up opportunity for veterinary. They've also, in this report, have said now CBD is actually good for dogs and shows efficacy in those things as well. So there's not just like the traditional medicine LP, and I'm sorry, that's the licensed producer in Canada, the parlance, but now there's more opportunities for branded products, for different opportunities. There's still you still are going to be regulated today by pharmacy rather than a medical practitioner, but a pharmacy would say, how does this react with other medications, or how does, a veterinary would be, how does this react with my dog's other treatment, or would it be? So it's opened a lot of doors, and it's it's given the opportunity for new doors to be opened. And I think there's a lot of opportunity for companies who know what they're doing in CBD to make meaningful products in the space.
Jesse, and if I could complement this, I think it's very exciting to see a government agency like Health Canada releasing a report stating that CBD is safe for over-the-counter purposes, for all the reasons that Jason mentioned. But also a report like this one is universal, just as like science is universal. So government agencies all over the world are going to be able to take this report as a reference point for how to regulate CBD in the future. And that not only means that there's a significant opportunity in Canada, but we're going to be able to now have a reference and support other governments that are trying to understand what are the safe quantities in CBD in food and beverage products? How do we put CBD formulations over the market? How do we treat it? Do we treat it as a pharma product or as a CPG product? This report enables us to go to those governments, those regulatory agencies that are looking out for companies like ours to help them understand. It's a great reference point to open the access to CBD in a much faster rate. And of course, our company has a tremendous, a very robust CBD business. We certainly are very, very optimistic about the potential outcomes over the short term with regards to this report.
And Jason, in Canada, do you think that, the opening up of the CBD market helps to relieve some of the pressure off of this high THC sort of craze that we see happening? I mean, it happens in the United States as well. I know it's very big in Canada. Like, does that help people understand some of the mix of the balance between the non-psychoactive components and the psychoactive components? Or do you think that they'll be sort of split and they'll live in their own lanes, often how they do here in the US?
I think all, and Luis's point, I think, is the most interesting to me, is that we now have governments publishing data saying this relieves stress, this helps on pain, this helps on anxiety, this helps you sleep. These are not like clinical trials anymore. This is like the government unanimously agrees, and we're now entering a new time. I think this opportunity is universal. There may be, I think there's a lot to learn globally about the impact of the terpene profile and the halo effect and the ability of cannabis as a full spectrum product to promote way more than just, getting high, as the high THC crowd sometimes looks for. I think there'll always be that lane. But as governments are now moving past anecdotal evidence to published data, we're seeing a much more understanding and acceptance. And I think that is universal.
That's great insight. Thank you. And we just touched on it, but the U.S. is its own animal, and so I'd like to pivot now to Holly. Holly, as a former regulator, you obviously have paid close attention to the evolution of this industry and the regulations here, and in some cases even written the language on how cannabis and its derivatives are regulated in the U.S. and most specifically in Florida. Can you help us understand where the legislature stands on some of the more well-known proposals around cannabis? So, immediately I think of safe banking. I think of the newly proposed from Schumer, the Cannabis Administration Opportunity Act, expungement, ultimately legal federalization. Can you kind of put, in context for us where we stand on some of those, and maybe if there are any levers that can be pulled to move some of these things along? It feels like things have been stagnated for a while.
Yeah, so in the United States, we poll at about a 70% rate with the population that they want to see all of these acts move forward. So it's frustrating on any given day that they haven't moved forward, especially the Safe Banking Act, because of some crimes that are happening out west. And in the last year, we have had some incidences that were very unpleasant, and we do need to address that. So that is putting a lot of pressure on our elected officials to address that in these upcoming sessions. Schumer just put forward a bill in the Senate. So that is big for the United States. That's the first time a bill has hit the Senate floor for cannabis. So the House has put them forward, the House has passed them, but the Senate has always been our stumbling block. So now we've made it to the floor. We are making progress. I think the midterm elections will determine a lot of what happens with this. And I'm not really sure which way they're going to go. I know that our current president has said he's very pro-cannabis, but when he's gotten in there, we haven't seen the push through that we needed to see push through. I believe that you're going to see it even go down to more of the state levels and continue there for another couple years, to be really honest, before we see anything done.
And is there, from your insights, you talk to regulators and legislators all the time. Is there anything that's on the horizon or any chatter around maybe what's coming next in lieu of some of these things that have been lingering, or changes that any of these regulators are looking to put forward as an alternative to what we've seen so far?
Well, I think you're going to see some changes in the Farm Bill coming up, and that's going to be pretty substantial. And Jason and Louise have heard about this too. You're going to see a differentiation between the cannabis plant going forward in the Farm Bill. There's going to be a hemp side for industrial use. My dress I have on is made from hemp cloth. You're going to see construction, glass, fiber optics, all of that. And so what you're going to see is they're going to make a category where that crop does not need to be tested and put through COAs and all of that, because it's not going to be consumed for humans. You're going to see more and more research grants devoted to that. I'm already seeing them out there. There is about $100 million that people have been applying for right now. So that is going to change the face of the industrial side. Then you're going to see still the wellness side, which I call the essential oil side. And that you're probably going to see the rate go up to 1%. The 0.3 came from Canada from a 1976 white paper. And that scientist would tell you, I'm not sure why they picked that number. It was arbitrary. He supports a 1% increase for the wellness for him because they see that there's no psychoactive effect even at that rate. That would alleviate a lot of issues we have worldwide with tariffs, trade, other countries, and state to state. So I think you're going to see that. You're going to also probably see them address these alternative cannabinoids, Delta 8, Delta 10. I'm not 100% sure how that's going to get addressed. There's still a lot of debate out there on what will happen, but I do believe it will be addressed.
Well, and so I was going to ask about that. So recently, the Ninth District Court upheld the legal standing of a lot of these alternative or rare cannabinoids, Delta 8, Delta 10, HHC, THC, a lot of these other, sort of non-traditional cannabinoids, citing the language that exists currently in the 2018 Farm Bill, although the Farm Bill is up for renewal and we'll have a new 2023 Farm Bill coming here soon. And so some of the states have chosen to outlaw or regulate those alternative cannabinoids in the same way as they treat traditional THC. And so is there, and I'd love to hear from everybody on the panel, are there any insights or any trends that we can point to in this space, given the current, federally legal status of some of these alternative cannabinoids?
So I'll jump in and then Louise and Jason, but what that Ninth Circuit Court ruling was about was a trademark. And what they said when they went to look, you can't trademark something that is on a CSA Schedule 1. So that's really what they were addressing and looking at. And they said clearly in the Farm Bill, it is legal and not a controlled substance. That set the pathway for other lawsuits in individual states that are going to continue to pop up and challenge. There's about 14 states that have made it illegal and taken a stance on it. There's about 3 that will differ from cannabinoid to cannabinoid, but there's 14 overall that have said, no, you can't sell it. There's 2 basic problems here. If the cannabinoid does occur naturally in the plant, they're trying to say it's synthetic, but unfortunately under statute, they haven't defined what synthetic is. So is synthetic when you're taking it from the plant naturally? There's where the problem lies. And that's where we're getting into a lot of litigation. And we haven't seen all of those completely play out yet.
I can only say that, yeah, from a U.S. standpoint, I mean, it's a very tricky thing. It is all derived from hemp, and it's all derived from the CBD molecule. So, as I think Holly mentioned, the idea of synthetic cannabinoids you can produce them. I mean, these are not those, to my definition of that. So, it does open up the opportunity, and I think there is, I think ultimately, from a player for like a Flora stature, we're looking for some support from the FDA eventually on this as well. I mean, food and beverage products are a big part of our portfolio, all the wellness products. And the FDA has been reticent to join the fray on this because of the misnomer of how these things are. So I hope in the future we'll see some sort of FDA involvement. Certainly we make our investment in our facilities, our people, our technology to make sure we'll withstand any kind of government oversight, but it would help perhaps get these lower, we'll say less than ideal participants in the market that may be, bringing the whole industry some bad names.
I will say one other thing. Jason has some great points. Going back to the Canada study, that's going to be very helpful in all of this too, because we don't have any studies and we don't have any scientific data to support a lot of this because the research has been suppressed. So this study that Canada has just put out is going to actually help the United States as well.
It's fantastic, obviously much needed and much anticipated here in the States. So as we look at, the broader cannabis landscape, even beyond, just the 3 countries that we've touched on here today, are there any predictions that you guys, might be able to make about how other international markets might begin to evolve? Are there any lead horses that you guys would look to, or any interesting regulations that have passed outside of just these sort of 3 key markets for Flora?
Yeah, look, I'll start, and then I'm sure Holly and Jason will complement my comments. We certainly have set our sights on Europe beyond the markets that we just discussed. Europe is a very interesting market, and there's a number of countries that have made progress in terms of regulatory and legislation. I think overall we have over-regulated the market the intent of the overregulation was to protect the consumer and the patients. But in trying to do so, we have made it almost incredibly difficult to have access to high quality cannabis at a lower cost. And that will only happen when there is a global trade of cannabis. When you only have regional localized markets, then there's the potential for inflation of prices, and the only people that are affected by it are consumers and patients. But the meaningful progresses that we're seeing in Europe, I would say Germany is a very interesting market. Obviously, there's almost no borders with the rest of the European Union. There's a very positive intention to legalize cannabis from an adult and recreational use standpoint. We are waiting to see some meaningful change in that reform before the year end. If that were to happen, then the European market will open up significantly. We also believe that what has happened in Malta, although there's things that need to be improved in terms of the regulatory framework in Malta, there's the opportunity for transformation of flower, import of flower from South America into the Maltese government and the Maltese country, and then export for the balance of the European Union. There are some regulatory changes that are being put in place to regulate CBD and other adjacent categories that are currently being worked on by the Maltese government. We're very encouraged by that. And then, of course, we see changes that are happening every day in the UK, in Portugal, that we're going to continue to look forward to. But certainly far and away, the most important one for us right now is Germany.
If I could jump on that point, I love this question, Jesse. So the world has changed. Like if we had this conversation a year ago, we were all focused, and I think it's very smart to focus on, there was very much a pathway of there's a medical market, and we're all striving to make sure that the medical standards are adhered to, and that's important, and we continue that progress. And I think we as a company have that as a pillar of our business, that we support this whole sector. But the world is now evolving, and that both in 2 ways. One that Holly mentioned earlier, the 1% number is very critical. The 1% number, as it expands globally and we start looking at different categories, allows for a far more superior product to enter these CBD streams. So, not to denigrate the hemp plant, but most really low THC hemp plants are much lower in CBD. The cannabinoid profile is much lower, so you need much more of it to produce better quality products. As we increase to 1%, your CBD levels can be 3 to 4 times of what that you would see in a traditional hemp plant. And we have a far superior product with terpene profiles and the entourage effect and the more spectrum that offers so much more diversity to consumers. Just that little 1% can dynamically change the global aspect of the CBD trade in flower. The second piece is, to Luis's point, as we see the evolution towards recreational, the same in Canada, the standards all kind of adjust. We look at things a lot easier. We introduce global trade. And that's not just to Europe, that's to Asia, and to Thailand is making meaningful developments, in New Zealand, in Australia, in Malaysia. All these countries are all seeing the same information. So as we as a global company look at these markets, it's just creating pathways, which I think is the most exciting thing we can look at, because we don't have to solely focus on this narrow confines of the medical structure. The world is opening up to us in many, many ways.
Very exciting. And this actually parlays well into a couple of the questions that we've received. Thank you for everybody who's dropped questions into the Q&A area, also for the people who submitted questions in advance. And Jason and Luis and Holly, you guys have all been working diligently on moving flower and derivatives around the world. Can you guys discuss some of the challenges that exist when we look at, growing, harvesting, and then ultimately exporting cannabis around the world?
Sure, I'll start maybe. The newness is new for everyone. you know, when I have a conversation with the government on an interest-new market, it's new to Colombia, it's new to that government on the other side, it's new on all pieces. So just the opportunity to go through the process, sometimes different languages, sometimes different time zones, obviously much more severe. Everything is taking a little longer than it should. And I think we would love to see everything move faster. I think that the lack of information and knowledge, it certainly slows things down, but I think I kind of feel like we're evolving past that. So our product, you have to spend years through the licensing process. We have to prove we can deliver the product over and over again. We have to prove that to get our license, to get our research grants, or to get our research for the strains. All this stuff takes time. We've closed that time now. Now it's time for us to move this around the world. Yes, there's hiccups. Every time I pick up the phone, I'm learning about some new minor regulation that exists in some other country. But these are things that we can be overcoming, and it's exciting from my perspective.
Yeah, and I would compliment. Go ahead, Holly.
No, go ahead.
Well, I'll be very candid with the audience. We're in the process of exporting for the first time flower across the world, right? And if you were to ask a business leader 10 years ago if they want to export hundreds of kilograms of cannabis or marijuana from Colombia all over the world, people would be like, "You're going to prison." Right? Is there reality where we sometimes are very impatient about what we're expecting, and of course we're doing things for the first time, so it takes a while to do them for the first time. But these are trailblazer movements. The first exports of cannabis flower out of Colombia, which has been illegal for over half a century. That is incredibly meaningful. It's a market that is over $400 billion globally. And it's just starting. So even though we have no patience internally from an operational standpoint, the movement that we're making and the progress that we're making is significant. When you're talking to an air freight carrier and you are asking them to carry this product, they're doing it for the first time. It's the first time they're actually doing this. It's the first time that customs is reviewing this, and they're getting comfortable with the fact that this is legal. And because it's the first time, they're not checking it once, they're checking it 4, 5, 6 times before they actually give it clearance. So all of these steps, even though they're painful and they take some time, they're very meaningful and positive steps. And they will continue to accelerate as governments and operators and stakeholders in the supply chain become more comfortable with the flow of goods.
Yeah, and I will just piggyback on that. Having been a regulator, you wring your hands a little bit when it's the first time because you're nervous. Am I going to lose my job? Am I going to get in trouble? And in the last 60 days, I have seen other countries and just start to do it faster, get more comfortable. I have already seen the progress. So, and that's the one thing too, when you're looking at new legislation worldwide, what you have to really look at is who is driving behind that and what is their mindset about cannabis. That is really important. That's why I believe in Colombia, we have a great thing coming up. So, because they're writing the rules like I did, you have to have an open and forward-thinking mindset. And I do believe Colombia is going to be a great place.
This is a great transition. We actually received a number of questions about Colombia specifically. Like we mentioned at the top, it's probably the least familiar to our audience. So we just have a couple minutes left. So we'll run through these. But what's the current attitude in Colombia post-election with the new administration coming online? Obviously, they are pro-cannabis, but there's a number of different changes from an administrative perspective here. So what's the general attitude and environment down there right now?
Yeah, I think from our ground team, and we have been very close to both the current government and the government that is taking hold on August 7th. The president-elect has found a way to find a compromise across a number of very sensitive items for Colombia, who has traditionally been a very conservative country. Because Colombia has been a conservative country, there has been a lot of hesitation around the legalization of cannabis, even though it has moved forward. But because the compromise has been put in place from early on, the reception from the population of Colombia has been very positive. And you would say, Jesse, that over the last couple of weeks, the topic that has reached media the most out of the Colombian government has been the legalization of cannabis and the support of agriculture out of Colombia. There's essays out there that highlight that Colombia's GDP, the contribution to the GDP of coffee, for example, is 0.9% of coffee of the total GDP of Colombia. Well, Canada's GDP, the contribution is 0.8%, cannabis to Canada's, who's like the 7th largest economy in the world. So that just highlights, in a country that can grow cannabis in a very meaningful way, we could become as important to Colombia as coffee is today. And that is just a very exciting promise. And it's a promise that the government is intent on fulfilling. And they're going to do it by making cannabis legal from an adult use perspective. It will allow to double the possibility of exports all over the world, making cannabis legal inside the countries, generating just one regulatory agency. Right now, we have to deal with 5. If we want to register one product, we got to talk to 5 different government agencies today. This law that is being presented by Senator Bolivar is creating one entity that will allow us to deal with all things cannabis and, of course, expedite the regulatory challenges that we have today. So it's incredibly optimistic today. I would say, obviously, the jury's still out on a number of fronts, but we certainly feel that when it comes to cannabis, we are in a great position to experience 4 years of economic growth.
That's really helpful. I think the general sentiment is things are moving in a positive direction again. So that's great to hear. One question, and interestingly, this came up yesterday in a chat that we had with another outside group. But is there an existing threat from cartels in Colombia? Is that something that's top of mind?
Security is always something that is top of mind when you're dealing with psychoactive substances. It's important to highlight that because we are cultivating both psychoactive and non-psychoactive plants, we have very strict security measures in terms of cultivation and the oversight of our products and our derivatives across the entire supply chain. There are very strict rules in terms of the security that you need to have in your cultivation facility, but we have also very strong support from both police and military to ensure that our team members are safe and that our product is safe and that our assets remain safe. The risk of illegal drug trade still remains in some areas of the country. Fortunately, we have not experienced any security incident since the inception of our company, and we are hopeful that will continue to be the case over the long term.
I would just say, it's so funny is that sometimes I get this question a lot too, but I have to remind people that when Canada began this process as well, these cannabis facilities were like more than bank facilities. There was moats, there was security, there was massive vaulting, there was on the ground security, there was drones, there was facial recognition. Every security measure in the world was taken in a lot of cases against organized crime. So it's not uncommon for an industry to be very cautious and understanding that there are forces that may be impacted by the legal drug trade. However, all of these cannabis facilities around the world that I've been, we all take this very seriously, and this is not something that's lackadaisical, whether it's in Canada or whether it's Bucaramanga. It's all very much taken very seriously.
That's great. Thank you. We have a couple of questions just to dig in a little bit deeper. And I think this might be the last question we have time for. We're going a little over, but it's a good conversation. So I'd like to keep it going if we can. A little bit more color on the status of the alternative cannabinoids. We touched on it a little bit, but is there any insight from what politicians are saying very specifically on the legal status of these alternative cannabinoids? Anything that we expect to come down the pipeline anytime soon?
Well, I will tell you this, the consumer demand is out there for them, and they are going to pay attention to that. That is why we have them. There is a demand for them, and the demand is not letting up. So I believe they're going to leave them alone. That's the general consensus I've gotten from all the lobbyists that I've talked to. So
I was just going to say something. I think that we'll see recognition and sort of like they exist, because right now there's not really any legislation that that has any kind of point of that. But I think it's recognition that they do exist. This is a part of the industry, and I don't believe it's going away either, from everything I've seen as well.
I don't either. if they do anything, I think they're going to add some testing requirements for it to ensure safety. Louise?
Yeah, and I would just add a compliment that, you know, our mission, our company's mission is based on plant-based wellness, right? And then when it comes to the cannabis plant is just incredibly bountiful in terms of its benefits. There are over 100 molecules, and we only talk about 2. We talk about CBD and THC. And there's a lot yet to be discovered, but consumers are very discerning, and they immediately understand the benefits of certain isomers and certain minor cannabinoids, and empirically they're gravitating to some of them because they provide them certain benefits that they're willing to go back for. So clearly, from a product perspective, we're going to pay attention to those. From a legal perspective, we're also going to pay attention to those. But we look forward to having more scientific based research that will support what consumers are telling us today.
That's great. Thank you so much. Well, like I said, we did go a little bit over on time, but I appreciate everybody hanging in there, and obviously to our wonderful panelists for answering all of our questions. Of course, we'd love to keep these conversations going. We'll be hosting more of these types of webinars in the future. If there's any other questions that come up, or there are topics that you would really love to hear our sort of expert panel address, you can always reach out to ir@floragrowth.com or across any of our social channels. We would love to hear, we'd love to keep these types of conversations going. So again, thank you all so much for being here. Thank you, Luis, Holly, and Jason. This was a really great conversation, and until next time.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Jesse.